Hello and welcome to Beyond the Continent. I am Adebola Adedugba, and here are stories making headlines beyond the continent. Let's begin at this hour with Israel's onslaught on Hamas. Israeli airstrikes targeted homes in southern Gaza on Friday, adding to what aid groups describe as an increasingly hopeless humanitarian situation despite efforts towards new truce talks. An Israeli delegation led by David Banya, head of the Mossad intelligence agency, has arrived in Paris in efforts to unblock truce discussions and the war with Hamas militant. His trip follows what the health ministry in Hamas-run Gaza said was the death of more than 100 people over the previous day. Israeli bombardment destroyed one house and left a gaping hole in the east of Rafah on the border with Egypt, where about 1.4 million Gazans have converged in the futile search to escape the fighting. Gazans who have had to leave their homes due to Israel's bombardment of the region have settled in tents of internally displaced persons in the al-Mawasi area west of Gaza's Rafah. The humanitarian crisis has reached unprecedented levels as those displaced say they are dying of cold and hunger, and the suffering is becoming unbearable. Israel has vowed to push ahead with a powerful operation in the overcrowded city, despite growing international condemnation.
من عبثها الكبيرة إنها الحين في الشهر الخامس وإحنا من مكان لمكان وين ما حكولنا اليهود روحوا هينا أجينا نزحنا والحين بيقولوا بدهم يجوا على رفح. طب أنتوا ليش بتجيبونا على رفح ما دام أنتوا بدكم تحتلوا رفح؟ وين نروح إحنا؟ وين نروح؟ وين نروح في أولادنا؟ السقعة دبحتنا والجوع دبحنا والحياة بتقرف فانا. حياة لا تطاق. يعني صار كل الشباب معهم حالات نفسية عصبية، اللي طلق مرته واللي ضرب ابنه ذبحه واللي من الضغط النفسي اللي مع الشباب ومع النسوان بطلت الواحدة تطيق جوزها، كثير من النسوان اتطلقن احنا قاعدين هينا بنحسب حساب لرمضان كيف بدها تكون حياتنا، كيف بدها المعلبات ذبحنا، الخضرة غالية، السكر غالي، الزيت غالي، ما احناش حين نشتري ولا.
Thousands of supporters of the Iran-backed Houthi rebels have rallied in the Yemeni capital, Sana'a, in solidarity with the Palestinians and against the American and British strikes off Yemen. Yemen's Iran-backed Houthi rebels fired 2 missiles at a British-owned cargo ship passing through the Gulf of Aden on Thursday, causing 1 minor injury and damage to the vessel. The rebels, who control much of Yemen, have carried out months of attack on merchant vessels in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, disrupting the key shipping route and prompting a military response from the United States, Britain, and recently France.
على الأمريكي والإسرائيلي أن يفهم وأن ييأس من مرور السفن في موانئنا، ومهما تحالف الأمريكي والإسرائيلي والبريطاني في تحالفهم يوحد
بصواريخه ونفر بمسيراته ونفر بغواصاته البحرية التي تغرق السفن الأمريكية والإسرائيلية والبريطانية، وكذلك إن شاء الله سننفر في البر وسننفر إن شاء الله إلى فلسطين.
Relatives of the Israeli hostages held by Hamas blocked the highway leading to Tel Aviv with a symbolic Shabbat dinner set up for their missing loved ones, calling for a deal to release them immediately.
We are blocking the road because this is the 20th week, the 20th Sabbath, that we cannot be with our friends and relatives and families. We are calling the government to say this is the first thing and the most important thing, and to be united for this most important thing. We must have them back.
And joining me to talk about this further is a foreign affairs analyst, Bolu Michael B. Good evening, Bolu. It's a pleasure to have you join me.
Good evening.
Now, there have been talks of another truce deal and, of course, release of hostages, which have not yielded any positive result so far. I mean, what do you make of this ceasefire happening anytime soon?
Well, it depends on the timeline. Do I see a ceasefire happening in the short term? Probably not. But in the long term, let's say maybe after 6 months to maybe a year, probably. Because as the months go by, Hamas is more desperate to have a ceasefire agreement with Israel. And Israel, on the other hand, have been very defiant in that, because they kind of have the upper hand in terms of finances and military strength. And because the war was incited by Hamas, they probably feel they do not rate Hamas enough to kind of yield to their conditions. They probably believe that since Hamas was the first to pull the trigger, it's there they want to yield to their conditions. So Israel, I guess, is one of the reasons why they're kind of defiant in their sense of supremacy over Hamas.
I mean, there's been international criticism of Israel's bombardment of Gaza, and this has still continued. Would you say organizations such as the UN, have lost their essence?
Well, I think it just basically shows how international diplomacy works. The resolutions of the United Nations not binding on any member state. It's only the resolution of the Security Council that is legally binding. So these international organizations, they cannot force the countries to act or nations to act or make their own foreign policy decisions. They can only persuade them and negotiate, and that's what international diplomacy is all about. So the fact that their strategies are not working doesn't mean that they have lost its essence or they're like a toothless bulldog. It only shows that that's how international politics works. If they're not debating or having these conversations at all, that's when I'll say that they've lost their essence.
Well, I mean, looking at the data by the United Nations, UN, I mean, more than 4 months of fighting has pushed Gaza's population of around 2.4 million people to the brink of famine, which has been occasioned by diseases and also reports of children and the elderly dying of hunger. What do you make of this?
Yeah, every war has its humanitarian side, and stories like that just bring humanitarian side of the Israel-Hamas war, and it's quite unfortunate that lives has been lost. The more they delay, having a ceasefire agreement or reaching a permanent or long-term solution on the crisis. So we can only hope and believe that the war will come to an end soon. And my heart goes out to every family, on both sides that have lost one person or the other or are affected in any way, whether directly or remotely. We just hope that this war will end soon.
Let's take a look at the issue of Yemen's Iran-backed Houthi rebels, an ally of Hamas, carrying out months of attacks on merchant vessels in the Red Sea and, of course, the Gulf of Aden. Now, these disruptions of key shipping routes and also prompting a military response from the United States, Britain, and recently France. What do you make of this in terms of how it's going to pan out?
I predicted, that there's going to be a military response from these countries that are heavy on protecting their own interests. They're finding it difficult to transport their goods through the Gulf, which is very important. But these are NATO countries, and looking at their military strength, the financial power, and their influence in the world. I do not see the Houthi rebels surviving for too long. It might take time, but I feel like considering the balance of power between the Houthi rebels and France, Britain, and the USA, and probably other NATO countries being affected, they can't really stand them in any way. So I see them at some point being, snubbed out and, being defeated.
All right, thank you so much for your expertise on the news. Bolu Michael B., a foreign affairs analyst, thank you once again.
My pleasure.
You're watching Beyond the Continent. We have more stories after the break. Stay with us. Thank you for staying tuned. The United States on Friday announced a fresh wave of sanctions against Russia a day ahead of the second anniversary of Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, as President Vladimir Putin hailed Russian heroes fighting there. U.S. President Joe Biden announced sanctions on more than 500 targets to ensure Putin pays an even steeper price for his aggression abroad and repression at home. He also renewed his appeal to the U.S. Congress to fund more military aid to Ukraine. Ukraine has been weakened by the blocking of U.S. aid and worsening ammunition shortages.
than 500 new sanctions in response. In response to Putin's brutal war of conquest, in response to Alexei Navalny's death, because make no mistake, Putin is responsible for Alexei's death.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has called for Western countries to accelerate delivery of promised air defense systems and fighter jets on the eve of the second anniversary of Russia's invasion. Zelensky spoke alongside Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen as Western leaders descend on the country in a show of support for Kyiv as the war enters its third year.
Air defense and future jets will help. More and more people will come back if the air defense shield will be strong in Ukraine. Artillery and drones that we've got from Denmark, not the first time, not the last, like Prime Minister said, preparing the UN of packages. So I think the most important things is to unblock the sky. Air defense and future jets will help with it.
Spanish politician Alejo Vida Cuadras, who was shot in the head in Madrid in November 2023, has insisted that Iran is responsible for the attack. He made this known on Friday during a press conference in the Spanish capital, his first public appearance since the shooting. The 78-year-old co-founder of the far-right Vox party called for the closure of all Iranian embassies in Europe.
A mi juicio, yo no tengo ninguna duda que ha sido el régimen iraní. Otra cosa es que hay una investigación en curso, secreto el sumario, la policía trabaja, el juez instructor trabaja y ese procedimiento dará el resultado que dé. Yo hablo de mi experiencia y de mis impresiones. Hay que cerrar todas las embajadas iraníes en Europa, hay que expulsar a todos esos falsos diplomáticos que lo que hacen es planificar acciones hostiles hacia Europa y hacia los europeos, y hay que intensificar las sanciones.
Still in Spain, 14 people remain missing in a fire that killed at least 10 in a multi-story apartment block in Valencia. The regional administrator, Pilar Benebe, told reporters on Friday that 14 people remained untraced, adding that the number could change. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, while visiting the site of the incident, called for empathy and solidarity in the aftermath of the deadly fire, adding that the priority is to search for victims.
Efectivamente, en situaciones tan dramáticas, tan trágicas como las que estamos viviendo, eso es lo que necesitamos todos mostrar. Empatía, cariño y solidaridad con las víctimas, con sus familiares y con quienes aún no saben exactamente qué ha ocurrido con muchos de ellos y de ellas. Nosotros estamos aquí, alcaldesa, presidente, para ayudaros y sobre todo para mostrar ese compromiso y esa solidaridad, en este caso del Gobierno de España, que no es sino la del conjunto de la sociedad española.
Neighbors of the building in Valencia, Spain, who witnessed the fire in the apartment block, which claimed 4 lives, say they are in a state of shock. A fire crews on Friday peeked through the still smoldering 14-story apartment block in Valencia after a blaze ripped through the building, leaving at least 14 still missing. Experts say the building was covered with highly flammable cladding, which could account for the rapid spread of the blaze after it broke out on the 4th floor.
Está hecho el edificio, enseguida se propagó, en cuestión de 3-4 horas estaba ya todo.
De esta magnitud puede incendiarse un piso, vale, pero esto no lo hemos conocido en la vida y hemos sentido mucho, amén de ya lo material fuera, no tiene importancia, las vidas humanas es lo que tiene importancia y esas personas ya no van a ser en la vida. Eso no lo van a en la vida.
Pues la verdad es que mucho dolor, porque al final vive mucha gente ahí, mucha gente se queda sin su hogar, sin sus mascotas, bueno, todo lo que tenían. Entonces, pues, muy mal, la verdad.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has welcomed the upcoming release of 137 billion euros in European funds for Poland, which had been frozen over a democracy row with Warsaw. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen made the announcement on Friday in Warsaw. Von der Leyen said the formal decision will be taken next week, adding the pro-EU government of new Polish Premier had taken major strides to end the standoff over the rule of law. The EU blocked billions of euros in COVID recovery funds to Poland under the previous nationalist government of the Law and Justice Party, accusing it of undermining the independence of judges.
To jest naprawdę góra pieniędzy, którą dobrze wykorzystamy i którą wykorzystamy też, żeby rozładować to wszystko, co budzi dzisiaj takie napięcie i niepokoje. Nie możemy, pomagając Ukrainie, równocześnie poświęcić takich życiowych, fundamentalnych interesów dużych grup ludzi w Europie, a szczególnie tu w Polsce.
Europe already supports Polish farmers with 22 billion euros through the common agricultural policy, and more will come. For example, the first payment under Next Generation EU includes 1.4 billion euros. They are available immediately for Polish farmers now to help them expand and modernize their production.
The German parliament voted on Friday in favor of legalizing the possession and controlled cultivation of cannabis starting in April, despite fierce objections from the opposition and campaign groups. Under the new law, it will be possible to obtain up to 25 grams of the drug per day for personal use through regulated cannabis cultivation association, as well as to have up to 3 plants at home. However, possessions and use of drug would remain prohibited for anyone under 18. Ahead of the vote, Health Minister Karl Lauterbach called on members of parliament to back the controversial law.
Wir beschließen heute ein sehr wichtiges Gesetz, mit dem wir unsere Cannabis-Kontrollpolitik grundsätzlich verändern. Wir verfolgen 2 Ziele. Das erste Ziel ist es, den Schwarzmarkt zu bekämpfen. Das zweite Ziel ist ein besserer Kinder- und Jugendschutz. Wieso müssen wir das tun? Kann es nicht so bleiben, wie es jetzt ist? Die Lage, in der wir derzeit sind, ist in keiner Weise akzeptabel. Sie ist nicht befriedigend.
You're watching Beyond the Continent. Let's take a short break. Stay with us. Thank you for staying tuned. A pile-up of around 100 cars on an icy expressway in eastern China left 9 people injured on Friday amid scenes of chaos. Passenger vehicles could be seen crammed up against each other, with one pushed skyward at an awkward angle and others reduced to pieces of twisted metal. The wet road in Sehou, a city located about 1 hour west of Shanghai by car, was strewn with broken glass as orange-clad emergency responders wove between cars and onlookers milled about. While no deaths were recorded, 3 people were hospitalized for injuries and 6 others suffered minor scratches. Earlier this week, meteorological authorities renewed a low temperature warning for large swathes of southern China following weeks of extreme winter weather across the country. Australia's Deputy Prime Minister, Richard Marles, has a firm support for Indonesia's territorial sovereignty. Marles, who is also Defense Minister, stated this during a meeting with his Indonesian counterpart, Prabowo Subianto, in Jakarta, adding there are no support for any independence movements.
Australia utterly recognises the territorial sovereignty of Indonesia, full stop. There's no support for any independence movements. We support the territorial sovereignty of Indonesia, and that includes those provinces being part of Indonesia. No ifs, no buts.
Ups and downs, but we consider Australia a good friend who is always, in many critical instances, have sided with Indonesia. And we are determined to maintain and enhance this relationship. So I don't think there will be any surprises, but we are determined to foster this.
Russia's appeal against the International Olympic Committee's decision to suspend its membership has been dismissed by the Court of Arbitration for Sport. The IOC suspended the Russian Olympic Committee with immediate effect in October for a breach of the Olympic Charter. The ROC recognized regional organizations from 4 Ukrainian territories illegally annexed by Russia since its full-scale invasion began in February 2022. The suspension by the IOC means the ROC is no longer entitled to operate as a national Olympic committee. And that's all on the news at this hour. Send your eyewitness report to the WhatsApp number on the screen and follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can watch us live on DSTV, channel 422, Star Times, channel 274, Avo TV, and YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I am Adebola Adeduba.